Welcome back to Truck and Talk, where we have real conversations with the people shaping the future of transportation. I'm Stephanie Valle, and today we're talking about something that impacts every driver and every fleet: health, mindset, and longevity in trucking. Our guest is Stephen Kane, the president of Rolling Strong, a company dedicated to helping transportation professionals turn adversity into strength and build healthier, more sustainable careers. Stephen, welcome to Truck and Talk.
Glad to be here, Stephanie.
So before we dive into the main conversation, we're going to take a quick detour for a segment that we call Fuel for Thought. So this is where we zoom out for a moment and talk about what's happening in the trucking industry right now, the trends and the challenges that affect drivers, fleets, and the future of the industry. It's our way of bringing a little industry pulse into the conversation and getting our guest's perspective. So are
Okay.
you ready?
Sure.
So over the past few years, driver health has shifted from being seen as a nice to have to a core part of safety and retention. So from your perspective, is the industry truly starting to connect those dots?
I would say that some companies are starting to connect the dots. I mean, we've definitely made progress in that area, but there are far fewer companies that don't deploy programs like Mesilla Valley does, and many more that need to, but we've made some progress.
And mental health is also getting more attention in trucking: burnout, isolation, stress on the road. Do you feel that fleets are better equipped today to support drivers emotionally, or is there still a major gap?
There's still a major gap. There is. From an HR perspective, people, just general HR practices, I think we've gotten a lot better on how we approach drivers, showing driver respect and that kind of thing. When you think about drivers 20 years, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, they were truly just a number. Work long hours, get it done, no questions asked. Today, people are considerate of home time and pay and, value of the human being. But we still have a long way to go.
And what do you think could be done? Is it just more training?
I don't think it's, I don't know if it's really training. I can tell you that, for me, whatever position I've been in trucking, one of the big things has been I've always tried to get the people that work for me to do a ride along the truck, or at least give them a very thorough breakdown of what it's like to be a driver. And they, say to me, why? And I'd say, because if you're going to make decisions or you're going to give feedback or you're going to help somebody, you need to understand what their life is like. And a driver's lifestyle is very different from everybody else's.
Okay, good advice. So for listeners who may be listening and hearing about Rolling Strong for the first time, can you explain what Rolling Strong is and how it supports drivers day to day?
Sure. So Rolling Strong is a workplace wellness platform. It's an ecosystem of many things to deliver tools to the organization as well as the individuals. So when you think of everything wellness, from biometric screenings to useful self-care tools to competitions, mental health, well-being, Rolling Strong provides all of those things. Companies can kind of choose from a menu of which of those things they want to deploy to their organization. And then we have a very different avatar with the driver when it comes to them. There's tools that we have available for them too that are very driver-specific, driver-friendly.
Can you walk us through how the partnership between Rolling Strong and Mesilla Valley Transportation came together and why MVT decided to get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So originally, I had a parent company that worked with MVT, and we had just launched this program. And we were looking for a place to kind of pilot and get feedback and see how the program would go. So I was introduced to the folks at MVT. They said, yeah, we really want to offer something like this to our drivers. And they took a shot at it. And it was great because we were able to get great feedback over time and really learn how to kind of contour the program and really make it make sense with feedback from the folks at MVT.
And you've spent decades in the transportation industry, and your personal journey includes overcoming significant hardship. What first drew you to trucking, and how did that path eventually lead you to Rolling Strong?
Wow. Well, that's a big question. So, I had a really tough life early on. So, I'm very transparent about my story. I lived in a homeless shelter. I was on the street. I bought a tent with money that I earned from shining cars and trucks on the side of the street.
And how old were you at this time?
19.
Okay.
Now I'd kind of come up in trucking because my dad had trucks, so I had loaded them and unloaded them and changed tires and done some things like that. But then had some hard times, and then bouncing back from that, I was shining cars and trucks and trying to get my feet in the ground. And I remember I was actually working for a trucking company called Esposito and Sons Trucking Company up in New England. And the owner, who knew my dad, I'm out there shining. It was October, and up in the North Country, your hands get pretty cold. The buckets of water was actually turning into ice as we were dipping our hands in them shining trucks. And Dick Esposito came to me and said, "Steve, why don't you, get your CDL? Your dad, had trucks. You know a little bit about the business. Instead of out here shining them, why don't you, get a CDL and get into trucking?" And at the time, it seemed like a good idea. So I shined cars and trucks, living in a tent, and I saved up my money to pay for truck driving school. And then I went to trucking school, and they assigned me a Kenworth T800 flat top sleeper was my first condo. And for me, going from, the life that I was living at that time to living in a truck, it was like really moving into a palace. So trucking gave a tremendous amount to me at that time in my life.
And there's always talk about how trucking offers a lot of growth in terms of funding, like you get a lot of money that way. So I'd imagine that you went from shining a truck to actually having a pretty substantial salary. That might have been
Yeah.
a huge way to grow for you.
Yeah, very substantial. And I actually worked for Allied Van Lines. And so at the time, it was really hard work. So I don't know if you're familiar with bed buggers, but, we load furniture all day long, move it, unload it. And so it was another great lesson in real hard work. And I did that for about 3 years.
Wow. So you often talk about turning adversity into purpose. So how did you use your own life experiences to shape the mission behind Rolling Strong?
Yeah. So many of those things. So when you think about, just the cliff notes of my life, being homeless, dealing with addictions. I've been sober for 27 years.
Congratulations.
So going through those things. And then when I went from Allied to Piedmont Transportation, I ended up in dispatch, running a super regional LTL operation. I went to the emergency room one night. I walked out with a diagnosis of cancer.
Wow.
And so now I'm like really after, climbing out of a homeless shelter and at the pinnacle of my success in the trucking industry. Now I'm facing, how I'm going to battle cancer and all that kind of thing. And at Piedmont Transportation at that time, all of the drivers created a fund. They donated an hour of their paycheck a week for me so I could have keep my insurance and keep a paycheck and go through chemotherapy and all that. So as adverse as that situation was, and as tough as it was to climb from homeless to truck driver and working for Allied and finally getting to the point where I had a double-wide trailer and a family and, was kind of at that pinnacle and starting all over again with an uphill battle, I realized that kindness, that level of genuine humanity was stronger than the adversity itself, and I embraced it. And so I said at that time, someday I'm going to give back. Someday in my career, I'm going to find a way. And many years later, I had an opportunity to build what we have now in Rolling Strong.
Wow. So what problem in the trucking industry made you realize that there needed to be a wellness platform built specifically for drivers?
Sure. So, my battle, again, I ended up working for Old Dominion Freight Line, big LTL carrier for many years. Worked many positions for them, ended up in Jacksonville. And in 2008, when the economy was having a tough time, they took me from an ops manager position and put me back to kind of combo driving, dispatching, billing, and doing all those things. I also at that time was on a boxing team locally and, sparring and staying in pretty good shape and everything. But I was still struggling post-cancer to really be in shape. And once I got back in the truck, I started to gain weight again. I was having some issues with my heart. And so actually at that time, I remember designing a routine where I was using my pre-trip as like a workout warm-up and, kind of the initial concept of something like that was born. Some years later, I was working on the deployment of telematic systems. I had worked my way up into corporate for Old Dominion. I was building a program, a telematics program and a fuel program, much like the great fuel program that MVT has. And I was at a conference, and they actually had an advisory committee, and they asked the question that year, what is the number one thing that people in the industry, what's the next technology we want to see? And the number one piece of feedback that came back was some kind of digital wellness program. So driving up the Florida Turnpike after that conference, I saw this big crazy vision in my head, and I was like, this is it. This is that thing that I can give back to those drivers that once helped me when I went through chemo. And I pulled over to a little restaurant with my buddies and started putting it down on paper, and a month later it was on a whiteboard in my loft apartment that my wife did not appreciate very much. But
Wow. So many wellness programs don't work because they don't understand life on the road. What do people outside of the cab misunderstand most about a driver's daily reality, which I think we actually touched on in our Fuel for Thought segment, but I'd love to hear more.
yeah, well, I think it's like anything else. I mean, common sense is they work long hours, they're sitting all day, and that kind of thing. But when you really think about what it's like for a driver who, is driving for 11 hours, and maybe at hour number 9, they got to pull over and chain up their tires. And then they still got to descend some big grade before being dead tired and pulling into a truck stop, that the best thing that they can do is go inside and get something to eat. And they're working on 10 hours to jump back in the truck and drive again. Most of us work 8 or 9 hours. We're not working 14 like they are in trucking. Most of us have 14 to 16 hours as a break. Truckers only have 10 hours and they're right back in the truck. And they have very limited resources when it comes to what kind of food they can eat and where they can exercise and all those things. So I think it's difficult to really feel what that's like for a driver. But when it comes to wellness, it's an incredible challenge.
So going back to what you were saying about the concept, can you give us an example of how the digital wellness program works?
Yeah, absolutely. So driver, through the login process when they're creating their account, we learn information about that driver, things like height, weight, age, other information that helps us immediately design, a nutritional profile. And so once they get logged into the app, we understand things like, when's their DOT physical date? What, term card were they given? So what risk factors do they have? What type of nutritional environment do they need to work in, right? How many calories, how many fats, protein, and carbs should they be eating in a given day? And so, with identifying that information, we can start to identify what tools they might want to use to help. And so they can log into the app, they can log nutrition, fitness, sleep, hydration, they can participate in competitions. There's a social page in there so they can, be in kind of a judgment-free environment where they can talk with other people. Coaches jump in there and give good feedback, and we drop educational content in there. So again, it's kind of like this safe zone wellness ecosystem they can log into and be part of, but we also make it fun by doing competitions. They can earn points, they can earn money and other incentives and things like that.
It must be really eye-opening for them, because I think everybody has an idea like, well, I eat bad, but maybe not that bad, or I try to, walk a certain amount of steps a day or work out. But when you're logging it, it is very different from what you think, your perception versus the reality.
Yeah. So logging can be a real pain. Like nobody really loves to log food. It's tough. So we make it as easy as we can. And our coaches they're not trying to say, hey, you need to log food every day of your life for the rest of your life. But if you're not eating the right things, or you're having a problem with BMI or weight reduction or other things that affect cholesterol and lipid panels and things like that, it's important to identify what you're eating. So log food for me for 3 days. And when they log that food shows up on a back-end portal that the coach can then log into and see not only what they're eating, but when they're eating it and how much they're eating at those times, and give them real feedback based on actual behavior.
And also just for movement, like when you were saying that people can do activities, I am sure that people who are driving a lot say, well, I don't know if I would have time for that. I'm driving so much. But if they know that others are doing the same, it's definitely encouraging.
Yeah, that others are doing the same. And then having the resources like the fitness section of our app that has a whole exercise library of workouts that you could do in and around the truck.
So when you talk about wellness, what does it actually mean for a professional driver?
So wellness can mean a lot of things for a professional driver, right? You have the physical wellness, which is the things that I was mentioning, your sleep, fitness, hydration. But then there's also the mental health portion of wellness, right? There's environmental wellness. There's a lot of components. There's financial wellness. We really focus on more of that physical side of wellness than the mental health side of wellness. And so everything has to start somewhere. So what we do is we look at, if you're having issues, whether it be weight related, whether it be risk factors, whether it be mental health, are you doing the things that you have the most control over first? What are you putting in your body? How much sleep are you getting? How much exercise are you doing? Are you doing anything to monitor and maintain stress through meditation or anything like that? And if those things are all in check, maybe it's something else. Maybe we need to do a referral to a mental health, another mental health solution.
Right.
But the base things are just those 5 pillars of wellness.
I would imagine that a lot of people might learn that, oh, I eat when I'm stressed, right? And then that's when you have to refer them to someone else. And why are you eating this certain thing? Because it provides comfort, right?
Yeah. We have some unbelievable experts on our team. I was actually talking to one of our consultants/coaches today who specializes in that. But it's logging food just gives you an idea of what they're doing, but it's often more important to understand why they're doing it. For me, Christmas is really tough because my grandmother made amazing food at Christmas time, and I just think that I'm supposed to eat a lot of bad food at Christmas time.
Don't we all?
Yeah. And so, there's a lot of times a reason why, and I get deeper into this. We don't have time on this show, but I talk a lot about, things like resentments and anger and fear. Those are things that can really hold us back from making any kind of change, whether it's changing our behaviors, whether it's changing our values and virtues, or our physical wellness.
What are the most common physical health challenges that drivers face today, and why do they often go unaddressed?
Yeah. So statistically, drivers have the highest rate of diabetes, hypertension. They have the highest rate of obesity. And so, when you think of those things alone, they also match very closely with the DOT physical and the criteria around the DOT physical. And unfortunately, those things also create higher risk factors when it comes to heart disease, diabetes, and early onset death. So it is a real serious problem.
And also mental health. We've been talking about it off and on throughout this conversation, and it can still be a tough topic in trucking. So how does Rolling Strong approach conversations around stress and anxiety and emotional well-being in a way that drivers trust?
Yeah. So first thing is, we really focus on the idea of meeting drivers where they're at. And so that comes through a certain approach called motivational interviewing. And, we're not pointing our finger at anybody. We're not shaking our pen at anybody. We're just talking to them, trying to discover, we're trying to help them discover. And so at some point in that journey, it might come up like I was talking about before. We've looked at the most controllable things like sleep, fitness, hydration, general well-being. And if that's not taking care of it, then the conversation might be a referral. We also have an integration with the largest digital mental health platform, one of the largest ones in the world right now, called Talkspace. So it's an add-on that people can put in the app, and so they can actually have unlimited texting with a certified mental health professional, including 1 video session per month. So if somebody has that level of issues and need help with it, we provide that service as well.
So you were just talking about you meet drivers where they are. So how do you design programs that feel more supportive rather than overwhelming?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's tough to do. Our intention always is to design programs that, are just easy to understand. They're very intuitive. And that comes down to, in our world, logging into the app and what that journey is like for them drivers. But the biggest support we have in that journey is really the coaches. Because not everybody is tech savvy. It can be very tricky to build a do-it-all application that can solve all these issues, and you have an aging population that doesn't always embrace technology. The good news is if you have that challenge, you can text or call a coach, and they'll walk you through, press this, press that. And if you don't like pressing buttons, we can just talk about it.
Yeah, and that's leaning into the next question, which is oftentimes if people feel like they don't understand technology, they do feel like they're being judged. They do tend to shut down and not want to reach out. So how do you make sure how do you sense when people are starting to feel defensive because they don't understand technology, but make sure that they still get the help they need?
Yeah. Well, it's not hard to figure out in the trucking world because truckers are very, very boisterous. They're very, a lot of times they're, they wear their feelings on their sleeve, and it's, very easy to tell that. But, you can quickly understand that when you're talking to somebody and they become defensive of a question, and so, you don't have to press that question, just talk to them, if they're not comfortable, then, you don't have to go much further. But eventually when you build trust, they will start opening up, and most of the time they'll tell on themselves.
Yeah. Can you give us maybe an example of what you mean by that?
About telling on yourself?
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you want to go through a coaching session right now?
Sure.
So,
Okay.
well, I mean, so if if you start, if you start a conversation, you just start telling somebody what the solution is.
Mm-hmm.
And then you continue to talk because you just think you have the knowledge and the information, and you just keep going. They're not going to learn anything from that. So it's important sometimes to speak a little bit about something, then ask a question, and just let that uncomfortable silence stew for a minute and see what their answer is, and then pick up on something as far as that answer and just ask them another question. So asking questions that aren't too overwhelming and just kind of slowly working your way into that can build trust.
And drivers can be skeptical of company-sponsored programs sometimes. So how do you build the trust to make sure that the drivers see Rolling Strong as something that really is for them?
Yeah. So when we have challenges with that. So what we learned is number one, when we deploy a program like this, we do it in a way where we're putting education out there. We're really getting leadership to embrace the program and get behind the program. And that comes through the marketing materials, the education materials, the posters on the walls, getting pictures with leadership and drivers and all those things. Because if we don't do that, then they do think it's spam when they get a call from a coach, when they, get an educational email or something. So you really have to co-brand it, and you have to really get leadership to voice their backing it. I mean, look, MVT is a perfect example of this. And we have several companies on the Rolling Strong program. We have several companies we talk to that don't. We've seen the difference between companies that say, yeah, we'll do this because they want to do just enough to check the box. And when they do that and they don't have that leadership involvement, the programs just don't work. And so we're even very cautious about who we decide to partner with this program, because we know if leadership doesn't get behind it, it's probably not going to work anyway. But when you have a program like we do at MVT, it works a lot better because leadership's really behind it, with me being here right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you've said in the past that small changes can lead to big results. So what are some realistic habits that drivers can start with today?
Mm-hmm. So I think one of the big ones is energy drinks, coffee. It's very common for drivers, any of us that go on a road trip, right? We're going to just get jacked up on coffee and energy drinks and stuff. If you just start with, hey, let's replace one energy drink with 2 glasses of water today, right? Let's just try to make that small change. And they do that and they accomplish that. So in Rolling Strong, you can log that in the app, or you can just report it to a coach on a coaching call. And then celebrating that success, right? You feel accomplished. I did it. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but for them, it might be a big deal. And then they shift to drinking more water than they do energy drinks. Because the truth is, energy drinks, which they jack us up, they bring us down. And when they bring us down, we're more apt to have a micro sleep and fatigue behind the wheel, which is a danger and risk. Right. And so we really work with them on simple things like that. And then we start working our way into some of those eating habits and some of those small changes, right? What's on your plate for breakfast? Well, let's change that up a little bit. Let's throw away the Danish and replace it with something that's more nutritious. Let's look at what oatmeal can do.
Yeah.
With driving, our nutrition is very specific, because big meals and lots of carbs for drivers can be a lot of crashes and a lot of micro sleeps. So we're really looking at, a series of small meals throughout the day, and dense food that's high in fiber and protein. That's more like throwing a log on the fire to burn, as opposed to throwing newspaper on the fire that'll burn up real quick.
Yeah, like sugar.
There.
Oh, I'll eat a smoothie, or I'll drink a smoothie on the road, and that does the same thing.
Yeah, and I was very guilty, and most drivers are, of just having something in the dashboard cup, right, that they can reach and grab as they're going M&Ms or whatever. And it obviously is going to hurt you over the long run.
How hard is it to convince drivers who always have, or maybe not always, but a lot of them have the mentality of caffeine is important to helping me stay awake, swap that out for water?
It's very difficult. And drivers are, and I'm one of them, and I've had the excuses too, but they're masterminds of excuses, and like anybody is that's approaching change. But a big thing with drivers is look, dispatch is breathing down our neck to have on time service and keep the truck moving and not pull over a lot. But when you tell them to drink water, it often immediately becomes, but if I drink a lot of water, I got to pull over to take more pee breaks. But that's not entirely true. If you're drinking a lot of coffee, which is diuretic, you're also going to pull over to have a lot of pee breaks. You're just replacing a better source. So, yeah.
All right. Good advice there. So how does improved wellness translate into safer driving and better decision making behind the wheel?
hmm So a couple things. One, I had a buddy of mine when I was dispatching at Old Dominion that turned over a tote on his truck coming back to the yard. It was a chemical, so we had a hazmat cleanup. He was very frustrated over it. He was a great guy. He actually was my driver trainer when I went to work there. And I got a call the next morning. He had had a massive stroke. He made it about a week. He passed. That's a very real thing in the trucking industry. I mean, that's ultimately why we're doing this, right? We want to help the masses, but we want to save the lives of a few along the way. And so that's, when you have high rates of diabetes and blood pressure and cholesterol and lipid panels, you have a higher risk factor as a carrier. And so what that translates into is a tired, lethargic, overweight driver that's driving down the road, drinking a big gulp and eating carbs, that's having micro sleeps and potentially could have a heart attack or stroke behind the wheel. Not behind the wheel of a car, but a massive 80,000-pound 18-wheeler that's catastrophic, not just for that individual, but all the others on the road. And from a financial standpoint, that's a pretty, large hit for a carrier as well. So all around, there's tremendous risk with the negative wellness of a trucking population.
And retention is a major challenge in trucking. How does investing in driver wellness help keep drivers in the industry longer?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing is just really having an opportunity and an avenue to show them that you care about them as an individual. When you have a wellness program, especially when leadership gets behind it, drivers, it's one more thing that drivers can understand that these people care about me, right? We're not just asking you to eat tofu and do jumping jacks, but we want you to actually be able to go home on the weekend and not be so tired that you can't play with your kids in the yard. We want you to have a long career, and at the end of the day, you're not going to, have a heart attack or a stroke and, have a negative life as a result, or, die earlier than your time. So it's actually an incredible gesture for companies and leadership to invest in a wellness program that works for their driver population.
So you were talking about a really tragic example earlier. Can you give us a moment where you saw Rolling Strong make a real difference in a driver's life? And you don't have to name names.
Yeah. Actually, so and I won't name the names because I don't know if I should, but we had a couple drivers at MVT that have done a credible job, and there's one in particular that, that does a really good job. But we've seen quite a bit of that. If you actually were on our website and our testimonial section, we literally have hundreds of drivers. So part of our program is on that social page, they can go in and they can create a testimonial before and after picture, but also urge them to tell the story. What did they lower? Would it be cholesterol or blood pressure? I got a long-term card in my DOT physical. We have hundreds of examples of drivers that have made, big changes, small changes and big changes.
Does Rolling Strong also help drivers' families help better understand and support healthier routines at home?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, any of the education that we deploy to the drivers, that is available to them and their families. The second thing is that we're always talking about drivers or anybody we work with, that this really is a family system thing. I think we all know how difficult it is when you're the one trying to get healthy and the others, the spouse is like not on that same plan. It makes it really difficult. But with Rolling Strong, we also have a spouse linking program where you can actually send your spouse an invite from the app, and then they can join the program and be in the same program, talking to the same coaches, using the same tools.
And trucking has a culture of pushing through pain and fatigue. So how do you help drivers rethink that mindset without taking away their sense of pride?
Yeah, because they do, have a lot of sense of pride in, I'm going to run this truck to the 11th hour. I'm going to run it through the night. I'm not going to stop and take that break. I think, it's really important to talk about the risk that's involved with that. Pointing out what that risk means for them in the day that they're in. And unfortunately, a lot of times it does, take recognizing something more catastrophic for people to make that big change. But we can point those things out, right? And so I tell my story over and over again. I remember what it was like to be home on a Saturday and be too tired to get up and go out in the yard with my son Giovanni and, play, in the yard we had at the time. I know what it's like to get sick as a result of being a driver and end up with a pacemaker in my chest, which I have now. And so I can tell those real life stories. So just trying to relate and identify with what that risk is for them, and that, sometimes takes off the edge. But, drivers are very prideful,
Yeah. And sometimes, unfortunately, people learn the hard way, right?
Yeah, they unfortunately do.
Yeah. So for someone who's brand new to trucking, what wellness habit would you encourage them to build early in their career?
Yeah. So when I when I first started driving truck, I was in pretty good shape. And the last thing that I ever thought was after a few years that I'd have this strange stuff called belly fat and high blood pressure. And it happened. And so, they don't really teach you in trucking school, and they often don't teach you at a company that you actually have to pay attention to your eating habits and your exercise habits when you go on the road. You're like, I'm good. But if you start building those habits from day one, when you're early on in the trucking industry, it can help, because when you develop bad habits are much harder to break than if you develop new habits from the beginning.
Yeah. So for veteran drivers who maybe feel like it might be too late to change, what would you tell them?
No, I'm 52 years old and I've survived my heart stopping 3 times. I've broken 19 bones. I'm a cancer survivor. And I've done a dozen Ironmans. So yeah, that's not an excuse. Just sometimes it comes back to just good old fashioned discipline, commitment, some of those kind of base virtues that, we need to pay more attention to. Sometimes it's not the app. It's not a fancy fix. Like, these are all tools, but at the end of the day, you got to dig in. You got to want it.
And about the Ironmans, again, those are not things that you build. Like, those are things that you build up to. You don't just jump into those. So to emphasize your point about, you can do things as long as you want to, and you build up to it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The Uber driver on the way over here was like, can I go and just do an Ironman? And I was like, no, you can't. So it was in 2018. I was 100 pounds heavier than I am right now. I was walking through an airport holding my shoe. I had gout, and I'd just come back from a conference where I had ran in a 5K that took me 46 minutes. And I was like, and I just started kind of hitting the ground rolling strong. And I was on the cover of a Transport Topics magazine, or in there with a big feature story. And I'm looking at myself and I'm like, how am I, the president of this wellness company, and this is the shape I'm in. And so I really had to dig back in. I had to get back to the shape that I knew I could be in, and I started that journey. And so the next year I went back and ran the 5K, and I did it in like 32 minutes.
Great.
It took me until last year where I ran a 5K in 1942.
Are you serious?
Mm-hmm.
A 5K in under 20 minutes?
Absolutely. At the American Trucking Association's annual conference, I sure did.
Wow.
And so but anything like that, it takes time. And I'm not urging that, hey, this is about becoming an Ironman or a marathoner. This is about, what is your possible, right? My possible is different from yours. But a possible that's stronger and better tomorrow than you think is possible today is real, if you believe you can get there.
So looking ahead, how do you see the role of wellness evolving in the trucking industry over the next few years?
Yeah, I'm feeling really positive about it. When I started doing this, there was one other organization doing it. I was on Sirius XM radio show last week, and there was 4 really strong people, all representing different wellness companies. And I know of 4 or 5 other ones that are out there. Never before now did we have driver-specific, transportation-specific wellness programs. I think people are opening their eyes. But again, and this was my message on that show, it's always my message, ignoring this problem is not going to make the problem go away. You have to do something. And whether you deploy Rolling Strong or something else, like, you have to do something. Drivers are not just going to get healthy because as an industry we, believe it's possible. We have to take action and do something.
So, is there something that excites you a lot about the future of driver wellness and leadership in transportation?
Yeah, well, as much as I think my story's kind of crazy that I went from, homelessness and heart attacks to, executive leadership and doing Ironmans.
And you didn't even mention the cancer diagnosis, but
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. But when you think of all that stuff, right? I wake up every day and I'm like, what crazy thing can we do today? What crazy impossible can we make possible? So I'm a believer. And so I think about the same thing with trucking. Like an industry that statistically has the, worst, biometrics and comorbidities in any industry in the world. Like maybe we can just turn that around to being one of the industries that has the best and healthiest people in the world.
And if there's one message that you would want drivers listening right now to take away from this conversation, what would you want that to be?
So if you listen to all the stuff and you read between all the lines, like in the beginning of your journey, it really comes down to believing that you can. It's about possibilities. If you're a driver over time, whether you have belly fat or not, whether it shows on the outside or not, there's an inside that can deteriorate. And one of those things is going to catch up with us, whether it's our beach body or it's, our heart that's 2 seconds away from a heart attack. The lifestyle itself is going to degrade our body inside or out. And it's really important that you take action with doing something different about that, and be willing to have the discipline to do something different.
Great. All right. Well, that is a wrap on this episode of Truck and Talk. A huge thanks to Stephen Kane for joining us and for the work that Rolling Strong is doing to support the health and mindset and longevity of drivers in the industry. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And if you're a driver listening, your health matters. And if you're a leader listening, investing in people is investing in the future of trucking. And if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. I'm Stephanie Valle. Until next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and keep on trucking.